We're back from our second race weekend at Mid-Ohio here in the shop to go over some suspension adjustments. Chris, what are we doing today?
Yeah, so now that we've had a dry session and a wet session at Mid-Ohio with NASA, we're ready to make some tweaks on the car. We have a lot of adjustment with the H&R kit. Well, the most obvious tweak that we need to make is we need to add some rear camber for sure, and then the car gets a little pushy, so we want to add some front camber too to match, because you don't want to have too much camber on one side of the vehicle and not the other.
So we're here with Matt to talk about the rear camber adjustment. Matt, what do we have here?
So the rear camber adjustment on this car from the factory is done using an eccentric bolt up on the upper control arm, similar to the eccentric bolt on the lower control arm for your toe adjustment. It's pretty difficult to get to on this car. It's kind of hard to see, but up in here on the subframe, there's an eccentric bolt, and when you spin that, it basically just pushes your upper control arm in and out and affects camber.
Right.
So that's the way the factory camber adjustment's done. We actually sell an adjustable camber arm that goes in place of this, and then you can either adjust your camber with your eccentric, or we have an adjustable Heim joint on the outer end, and that gives you a little bit more adjustment.
Now we're at the front to adjust camber. What's the first step for us?
So in order to adjust camber with these coilovers, they actually have a really nice camber plate up top that has some incremental marks and stuff, so it makes it easy to decide how much camber you want to put into it.
Right.
In order to get to it, we need to remove this shock, then we can make our camber adjustment. So to do that, it's pretty simple. It's just your sway bar link, your lower pinch bolt, and you can either disconnect the brake line and the wire for the wheel speed sensor from this bracket, or you can just unbolt the bracket from the knuckle. So that's kind of what we're gonna do, get the shock out, and then we can make our camber adjustment. First things first, we're going to unbolt the bracket instead of trying to undo the clip for the brake line and all of that nonsense. We'll just unbolt it. So I'm gonna give you that. Just take that bolt right there out, and that'll undo the bracket.
Make sure we're going the right way. Yep.
Now this step is just kind of to ensure that when we go to drop the knuckle down, that we don't overextend this wire and damage our wheel speed sensor wiring, or overextend the brake line and do any damage to our brake hose.
Makes sense.
Okay, now that that's loose, we'll take our sway bar link loose. We're gonna hope that this takes it loose. So we're gonna have to hold it from the back side because it decided it didn't want to come loose. Okay. So sometimes there'll be like a little bit of pressure to get these out just because they come out at an angle. So you'll either have to push up on the sway bar or down just a little bit just to get it to release. But once that's out of the way, we can just kind of push it down out of the way, and now we'll undo our pinch bolt. What I'll do is I'll undo the pinch bolt first and then get the spreader, because it won't drop off without the spreader in there. So there's really no reason to worry about getting that in there until you have the bolt out.
Do you want me to twist that off? Coming all the way out.
Yeah. Quick disclaimer about what I just said about that it won't drop off without the spreader. That can depend on the aftermarket shock you're using, because sometimes the diameter isn't quite as big as the stock shock diameter. So sometimes they will drop off without the spreader in it. But most high quality coilovers like these are extremely close to factory shock diameter to make sure that that fit is correct, like these H&Rs. So this isn't gonna come off without the spreader in it. But to each their own, I guess. Your situation could be different. You can already see start to slide off on its own once the spreader's in there. That's why this tool is so invaluable. That's a Schwaben tool you can get at ECS.com. Because of the nature of the design of the monoball, it doesn't have as much up and down articulation as like a rubber bushing would. And that doesn't really, it's plenty enough for normal driving conditions, but when you try to do something like this where you're pushing down, you just kind of run out of room pretty quick because of the design of the monoball. So where I thought we weren't gonna have to undo the lower ball joint and the axle nut, we have to undo the lower ball joint and the axle nut. Here you go, I'm gonna let you do this.
Okay.
You just need to take the 3 nuts loose for the lower ball joint.
Do we need to put
Just
like
a few
grease on
ugga
those?
duggas.
Okay.
Sometimes the impact doesn't do it, sometimes it does.
It's at an odd angle, though. Oh. What angle should I be at for this?
So you want to be like here, pretty much.
Okay.
Because then you can pull out. That's going to be your best bet. So just stand in front of it and pull out. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, they're tight.
Oh, well, cool.
That's all right. So now what we need to do is we need to lift the knuckle up off of the control arm, swing it out so we can drop it down far enough to get it off of the shock.
Okay.
That's gonna be a little bit difficult because kind of what happens is while you're trying to lift it up off of the control arm's also trying to go back to its center position, so it's kind of pushing up against it. So you need to pick up on the knuckle and pull down at the control arm at the same time. So I'm gonna have you pull down on the control arm and I'll pick up on the knuckle.
Tell me when you're ready.
Yep. Good?
Yeah, I think so.
You can let go?
Yep.
Sometimes what happens is the axle splines get jammed up in the wheel bearing splines a little bit. Just needs a little persuasion. Just make sure you have something big enough where you're not going to be contacting the inner surface because you can damage the threads in the axle, but not something so big that you're going to hit the outer splines and damage the splines.
Okay.
There. So now that that's out, just kind of get your axle up there and you can hang the knuckle from the control arm. Make sure you're not putting too much pressure on your brake line or your ABS sensor. Okay, so now that we have the coilover free, we just need to take the top 3 nuts off, and then we can remove the coilover. So I'm gonna let you decide what you wanna do. You can either take the nuts off and I'll get the coilover, or you can grab the coilover and I'll take the nuts off.
I'll take the nuts off.
All right, there you go.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So now you can kind of see, this is the factory rubber gasket that just kind of isolates this top mount from the shock body to limit noise. So we're going to take these loose so we can move this to its most negative position. They do give you some positive adjustment too. That could be used if like you have extended lower control arms, or like let's say this car was being used for some heavy track purposes and you wanted to make the wheelbase a lot wider and you did that with control arms.
Right.
You would have to push this farther positive to compensate for the lower connection point being farther out as well.
Gotcha.
So, okay. So now we're able to adjust this. So you can adjust it. That's all the way positive. That's all the way negative. So that's kind of where we want it. I didn't loosen these up very well. That's kind of why it's a little bit sticky, but yeah, this is pretty easy to do. That's pretty much all you do to adjust your camber. It's pretty simple. So we're gonna go all the way negative. We just want to tighten these back up.
Takes 2 minutes, but it takes 20 to get the rest of the car apart.
Yep. Yeah, it takes longer to take the shock out than it does to actually adjust camber. So there you go.
Cool.
We're done. So now that we got the camber adjusted, I'm gonna slam this back together. We can get it over to the alignment rack, and we can then adjust our rear camber because that kind of needs to be done there, and we'll get this thing aligned. Okay, so now that we have our front camber set, we're going to align the car. We can check out kind of where setting them to max negative is going to put us from an actual degree standpoint on the lift, and then we can do our rear camber adjustment. We're probably just going to go with as much as we can get the eccentric to give us. Judging by the tire wear on the car, we probably need as much negative camber in the rear as possible. So we're just going to kind of max it out, see where we end up, and try it at the track.